The global silver market just hit a critical turning point, and most people aren't even paying attention. Mexico, the world's largest silver producer, has quietly transformed its entire mining regulatory framework. And the ripple effects are starting to spread across global supply chains, from solar panels in California to electronics manufacturing in Asia. This isn't about speculation or market hype. This is about understanding a structural shift that's already happening. Welcome back to the channel. Let me be crystal clear about something. This video is for informational and educational purposes only. We're not here to give financial advice or tell you what to do with your money. We're here to analyze the facts, look at the data, and understand a significant policy shift that's reshaping one of the world's most critical commodity supply chains. So here's what we're covering today. First, we'll examine exactly what regulatory changes Mexico has implemented. Second, we'll explore why the government made these decisions. Third, we'll analyze the impact on mining companies currently operating in Mexico. Fourth, we'll look at what this means for global silver supply. And finally, we'll discuss the broader economic implications. Let's get into it. To understand why Mexico's regulatory changes matter so much, we first need to understand Mexico's role in global silver production. Mexico isn't just a silver producer, it's the silver producer. In 2024, Mexico produced approximately 6,300 metric tons of silver. To put that in perspective, that's nearly double what China produces, and China is the world's second largest producer. Mexico accounts for roughly 23% of global mine production and approximately 18% of total world silver supply when you factor in recycling and other sources. For centuries, literally since the 1500s, Mexican silver has been a cornerstone of global precious metals markets. But here's what makes this even more significant. Silver isn't just sitting in vaults anymore. Modern industrial applications have transformed silver from primarily an investment metal into a critical industrial commodity. Today, silver is essential for solar panels, where it's used in photovoltaic cells due to its unmatched electrical conductivity. It's critical in electronics manufacturing, from smartphones to laptops. It's used in electric vehicle components, medical equipment, and even water purification systems. According to the Silver Institute, industrial demand now represents a major portion of total silver consumption, with the solar industry alone consuming somewhere between 15 to 20% of global silver supply. So when Mexico, which produces nearly a quarter of the world's mined silver, changes its regulatory approach, the global market pays attention. In May 2023, Mexico enacted significant amendments to its mining law, the National Waters Law, and related environmental legislation. These weren't minor tweaks. They represented a fundamental restructuring of how mining operates in Mexico. Let me break down the key changes. First, concession duration and process. Mining concessions, which previously lasted 50 years, have been reduced to 30 years, with the possibility of a 25-year extension. A second extension is possible, but only through a public bidding process. Importantly, new concessions are now awarded through competitive public bidding designed to ensure the Mexican state receives the best economic consideration. Second, water requirements. Mining concessions are now contingent on obtaining national water concessions specifically for mining purposes. This is particularly significant because many of Mexico's major mining regions are in arid zones where water is already scarce. The government has also launched a voluntary program encouraging companies to return unused portions of their water concessions for reallocation to water-scarce regions. Third, community consultation and benefits. Perhaps most significantly, companies must now conduct prior, free, and informed consultations with indigenous and Afro-Mexican communities in affected areas. Additionally, companies must pay at least 5% of mining profits directly to affected communities. This isn't optional. It's codified in law. Fourth, environmental obligations. Companies must now submit detailed environmental impact studies, social impact studies, and mine restoration, closure, and post-closure programs. Financial guarantees through deposits, insurance, or trusts are required to ensure these obligations are met. Fifth, the concession freeze and recovery. President Claudia Sheinbaum has made it clear that new mining concessions will not be opened. In fact, the government is in the process of recovering over 200 mining concessions that were previously granted but have remained inactive and unproductive. Sheinbaum has emphasized that natural resources cannot be handed over and that unused concessions should return to state control. Now, it's important to understand the government's rationale here. These reforms weren't created in a vacuum. From the Mexican government's perspective, these reforms address several critical issues that have been building for decades. Environmental protection. Mexico has faced significant environmental challenges related to mining, including water contamination, ecosystem disruption, and inadequate mine closure practices. The new regulations aim to ensure that companies are held accountable for environmental impacts throughout the entire life cycle of a mining operation, including after closure, community rights, and social justice. Historically, mining communities in Mexico have often felt they bore the costs of mining operations, water use, environmental impact, disruption, without receiving proportional benefits. The mandatory community consultations and profit-sharing provisions aim to address this imbalance and ensure that indigenous and local communities have a voice in decisions affecting their territories. Resource sovereignty. There's a broader philosophical shift happening here about national resources. The government's position, as articulated by President Sheinbaum, is that Mexico's natural resources belong to the Mexican nation and should primarily serve Mexican interests. The recovery of inactive concessions and the ban on new concessions reflect this sovereignty-focused approach. Water security. Water scarcity is becoming an increasingly critical issue in Mexico, particularly in northern mining regions. The government views water as a human right that must be prioritized over industrial uses when resources are limited. Now, these objectives, environmental protection, community rights, resource sovereignty, are difficult to argue against in principle. The question isn't whether these are worthwhile goals. The question is, what happens when you implement these changes in a major global commodity producer? What are the practical consequences? And that brings us to the impact on mining companies. The regulatory reforms have created what industry observers are calling a period of heightened legal uncertainty and administrative congestion. Let's look at what's actually happening on the ground. Permit delays. According to Mexico Business News, approximately 160 mining projects are currently stalled due to missing environmental permits and the lack of implementing regulations for the new mining law. That represents roughly $4 billion in stalled investment. Here's a key detail. As of late 2025, the federal government had not yet issued the implementing regulations for the 2023 mining law reforms. This created a regulatory vacuum where the law has changed, but the specific procedures and requirements for compliance weren't fully defined. Companies were operating in a legal gray zone. Shift from exploration to existing operations. With new concessions frozen and the regulatory environment uncertain, both domestic and foreign mining companies have largely shifted their focus away from early-stage exploration. Instead, they're concentrating on maximizing production and efficiency at existing operations. Companies like Pan American Silver, First Majestic, and others with established Mexican operations have emphasized production optimization and cost management rather than expansion. First Majestic, for example, reported record consolidated silver production of 15.4 million ounces in 2025, focusing on getting the most out of existing assets. Water concession challenges, the requirement that mining concessions must have corresponding water concessions, has created additional complexity, particularly in arid regions like Sonora and Durango, where water rights are already contested. Legal challenges and Supreme Court rulings. The reforms triggered numerous constitutional challenges from mining companies and concession holders who argued the changes violated acquired rights and legal certainty. However, in June and September 2025, Mexico's Supreme Court issued rulings upholding the constitutionality of the reforms. The court clarified that mining concession applications don't create vested rights and that the Mexican state has broad authority to redefine the regulatory framework governing natural resources. This was a critical turning point. After these Supreme Court decisions, the reinstatement of the previous mining law became essentially impossible. The new framework is here to stay. Industry response. Major industry associations and mining companies are now engaged in ongoing dialogue with federal authorities, not to reverse the reforms, but to refine their implementation. The goal is to create clear, workable procedures that can achieve environmental and social objectives while maintaining Mexico's competitiveness in attracting mining investment. So that's the situation within Mexico. But here's the critical question. What does all this mean for global silver supply? Here's where things get really interesting from a supply chain perspective. The supply deficit context. The global silver market is already facing structural supply constraints. According to the Silver Institute, the market is projected to experience its sixth consecutive year of supply deficit in 2026. That means global demand is consistently exceeding newly mined supply. The 5-year cumulative deficit now stands above 800 million ounces, and 2026 is expected to add another 67 million ounce shortfall. Now, Mexico's regulatory changes aren't the cause of this deficit. The deficit is driven by surging industrial demand, particularly from solar panel manufacturing, electronics, and other green technologies. But Mexico's situation definitely impacts how the market responds to this structural shortage. Reduced exploration equals future supply concerns. The freeze on new concessions and the slowdown in exploration activity means there's less pipeline of future production coming from Mexico. Mining projects typically take 7 to 15 years from discovery to production, so decisions made today about exploration directly impact supply availability a decade from now. If Mexico, which produces nearly a quarter of global mined silver, has essentially paused exploration for new deposits, that creates long-term supply questions even if current production remains stable. Production optimization versus expansion. Mexican mining companies are focusing on optimizing existing operations rather than expanding. This means production levels are likely to remain relatively stable in the near term, but may plateau or decline over time as existing deposits are depleted without new discoveries coming online to replace them. Price implications. J.P. Morgan Global Research has projected silver prices averaging around $81 per ounce in 2026, more than double the 2025 average. Now, that projection is based on multiple factors, including industrial demand growth and investment demand, not just Mexico's regulatory situation, but supply constraints from major producing regions certainly contribute to price support. The solar panel factor. This is particularly significant given solar panel demand. Solar photovoltaic manufacturing is the fastest growing source of silver demand and is expected to reach 29 to 41% of total supply by 2030, according to forecasting studies. If Mexico's silver production plateaus or declines while solar panel manufacturing continues to grow exponentially, the supply deficit becomes more acute. That could either push prices significantly higher, incentivizing production elsewhere and technological substitution, or it could constrain the solar industry's growth trajectory. Geographic diversification. Some analysts suggest that Mexico's regulatory uncertainty may accelerate investment in silver production in other countries like Peru, Chile, China, and even the United States. However, developing new supply takes years and significant capital. Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Mexico's mining reforms are part of a larger global conversation about resource nationalism, environmental sustainability, and the balance between economic development and social responsibility. Similar debates are happening in Chile with copper, in Indonesia with nickel, in the Democratic Republic of Congo with cobalt. Governments around the world are reassessing the terms under which they allow foreign companies to extract national resources. From an economic development perspective, mining continues to play a significant role in Mexico's economy. According to recent studies by the Center for Economic Research and Teaching, the sector contributes approximately 4.7% to Mexico's GDP and supports over 3 million jobs directly and indirectly. The challenge for policymakers is finding the right balance. Regulations strict enough to protect the environment and communities, but workable enough that companies can still operate profitably and continue investing. President Sheinbaum has indicated that critical minerals discussions with the United States will proceed under principles of sovereignty, meaning exploration and research conducted independently within each nation's borders rather than joint operational processes. This suggests Mexico views its mineral resources as strategic assets that should be developed according to Mexican priorities, not just global market demands. So here's where we are. Mexico has implemented comprehensive mining reforms that prioritize environmental protection, community rights, and resource sovereignty. These reforms have created short-term uncertainty and slowed exploration activity. The global silver market is already facing a structural supply deficit driven by surging industrial demand. And Mexico's production trajectory over the next decade will significantly influence how that supply deficit evolves. This isn't a simple story with a clear conclusion. It's a complex policy challenge where legitimate environmental and social concerns intersect with global supply chain realities and economic considerations. What happens next depends on how effectively Mexico can implement these reforms in a way that achieves environmental and social objectives while maintaining a viable mining sector. It depends on whether other silver-producing countries can increase output to offset any Mexican production constraints, and it depends on whether technological innovations can reduce silver intensity in industrial applications or develop substitutes. These are the questions worth watching as this situation continues to evolve. So what do you think? Are Mexico's reforms a necessary step towards sustainable mining, or do they risk creating supply chain disruptions that could impact everything from solar panels to electronics? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this analysis helpful, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into global economic and commodity market developments. I'll see you in the next one.